Hi, this is Tamara Kelly from mooglyblog.com, and in this video, I'm going to be demonstrating how to crochet the add-on bits so you can create your own raccoon squish. This is a free pattern you'll find at mooglyblog.com, and you will need the free written pattern to complete making your own squish. You can find it at mooglyblog.com, Raccoon Squish. Plug it into your favorite search engine, and it should pop right up. To make this squish, I used a USL 8mm crochet hook. This one happens to be by Susan Bates. I also used 300 yards of Bernat blanket, which is a number 6 super chunky yarn. You can see here I used 3 colors, a gray, a white, and a black. To fill out my raccoon squish, I used a 10-inch microbead pillow ball, and then in the tail I did use fiber fill. You can see the big fluffy tail right back here. For the face, I also used a pair of safety eyes and a safety nose. I also definitely recommend that you have lots of stitch markers handy while creating your squishes. Let's go ahead and take a closer look at our raccoon friend. So here is our finished raccoon squish. You can see this is a big 10-inch ball that I have used to stuff our guy here. Now we start by making the body, and the body for the squishes are all pretty much the same, and they're just half double crochet worked into a spiral. So I do have a separate video tutorial on how to work in a spiral. So you'll want to follow the written pattern for that. It's all just one color, worked all the way down for the body. Then, of course, we have the ears which get attached, the mask with these little eyebrow details. We have the nose or muzzle right here that we put around our nose. We embroider on our little smile right there. And of course, these pieces are all crocheted separately and added on. When we make the belly, it's a lot like the belly of a lot of our other squishes. This is a separate piece where we crochet from the bottom up again here in a spiral, this time with our white. Before we add the last round, which we do in gray, we pin in our feet and crochet over those. Again, this is just like the feet in a lot of the other squishes we've made, like the cat and the fox, and, well, basically most of them that don't have tentacles and aren't birds. So on the back, our last piece, of course, that we need for a raccoon is a big fluffy tail, and you can see right here. While the rest is filled with the big microbead pillow ball, for the tail, I did use regular polyfill. Not too much, but enough to give it a good shape and a good feel. So let's go ahead and get started. So after you've got the body made, the next piece we usually make is the snout. This is, of course, the piece that goes behind the nose and the little smile that we can embroider on. So for this, I used the white, and I'm going to start by making a magic circle. I like to go over my non-hook finger twice, like so, and then insert my hook under both of those loops, grab the loop that's furthest back, pull it just under that edge. You can see I'm holding on to that end with my fingers, and then yarn over and pull through. From here, I'll go ahead and start crocheting according to the instructions. I'm going to chain 1 and then single crochet into the magic ring. When I do that, I want you to notice that I've gone under that loop as well as our tail end right there. So there's that first single crochet. Now, the nice thing about Bernat blanket, of course, is big, super bulky yarn. It's all locked together, so I can go ahead and take my finger out. I am, however, going to grab one of my stitch markers and put it right in the top of this first stitch. Anytime we're working in a spiral, and really anytime I'm working in a circle, I like to make sure to use a stitch marker at the very least in the first stitch of each round. Especially when working in a spiral, it can be very easy to lose your place. So having a stitch marker in that first stitch and carrying it up with that first stitch of each round can be vitally important. Now that we've got that single crochet in there, we're going to work 9 half double crochets in the ring. So that will be a total of 10 stitches. Now again, for these half double crochets, I want to make sure that I go into the ring itself and that I catch that tail end in each one of these stitches. It's pulling on that tail end that will allow me to close up the center of my stitches very nicely. Now, because Bernat blanket does have a lot of texture to it, which is lovely, it can make pulling that magic ring a little bit more difficult because if you pull hard enough, you can break this yarn. So after a couple of stitches, sometimes I'll start closing up that ring to make it just a little bit smaller so that I don't have as much to pull into when I'm done. Then I can go back to adding stitches until I have a total, again, of 10 stitches here for round 1. So now I've made my 10 stitches. We are working in a spiral, so I'm not going to join with a slip stitch. Again, that's another reason it's so important to have that stitch marker. We won't have the jog of a chain 1 after a join that we would have if we were working in normal joined rounds. So after I finished my stitching, I did go ahead and pull on that tail and make the center hole small. If you find that you just can't pull if it's catching, when it's time to weave in this end, make sure to use that end, and you can use the end to sew that center closed if that turns out to be the easiest way for you to do it. Now we're ready for round 2, which is very simply going to be 2 half double crochets in each stitch around. Now, again, we are working in a spiral, so this is vitally important. I've made that first stitch right in our first marked stitch there, so I'm going to move my stitch marker up. So now I know this is the first stitch of our new round. You can see without that jog, it's just smooth there, so that stitch marker is super duper important. So again, I'll put a second stitch in that stitch so we can have our increases. And I'm just going to put 2 half double crochets in each stitch around for a total of 20 stitches at the end of round 2. So now I've finished round 2, and you can see our circle has really grown. We're ready for round 3, which isn't really a full round. It's just a few stitches to get rid of this, basically this jog created when we've come up here working in a spiral. So I'm going to get this stitch marker out of my way and put a single crochet in the first stitch. And if you'd like, you can go ahead and mark this stitch, but you don't necessarily need to. This is our last round here. After that single crochet, then we are going to slip stitch in the next stitch. And you can see by shrinking the height of our stitches here, how this has helped smooth out our circle. So now what we want to do is break the yarn, and then we'll seamless join to the next stitch. But we're not going to cut it off at the usual 4 inches or so. Instead, we want to make sure to leave a long tail for sewing so that we can sew our snout to the body without having to cut an additional length of yarn. So the way I like to do that, and always make sure that I have, frankly, more than enough yarn to sew my piece on, is I just take my yarn and go right around the object that I intend to sew on about 2.5 to 3 times or so. Pull up a little bit more yarn here from my ball. There we go. So that's about 3 times around. So I'll go ahead and cut my yarn, and this way I know I will have plenty when it's time to sew my snout onto the body. So to finish up this piece, now that the yarn is cut, I'm just going to pull up on that loop so I can pull that tail end right up and through. There we go. And then I'm going to grab a yarn needle. And of course, we need to make sure we get one with a large opening to it, a large eye, so that we can fit our super bulky yarn through it here. There we go. So then I am just going to go right into the very next stitch here along the top of our circle or our snout with my yarn needle and pull the yarn right through. Oop, get that straightened out. There we go. And then just come back right in that same space the yarn was coming from. Make sure it doesn't get tangled on itself here. There we go. So you can see this has given us a really nice smooth circle for our snout, and we've got this long tail all ready to sew it on. But for now, we'll set it aside and move to the next piece. The next pieces that I like to make are the feet and belly, and for this pattern, they're exactly the same as they were for the fox squish. The only difference is for the belly, we switch colors and work the last round in gray. So the next piece that I would like to make are the ears, and of course we're going to need 2, and we're going to be using both the gray and the black yarns. Now, if we take a close look here before we get started, I want to point out that I did my color switching a little bit differently for this ear in order to create this really solid black inner ear and have just a little bit of overlap here that I think gives a really nice sort of almost furry look. So for the ears, when we change our colors, when we change to the black color, we're going to finish the last gray stitch with black. But when we switch back to the gray, we'll finish the black stitch with black yarn, then yarn over with the gray yarn to begin the next stitch. This is what creates that more solid look for the inner ear. I know that was a lot of words. Don't worry, we're going to work through one together. So to begin round 1, we're using color A or the gray. We're going to start again by making a magic circle and then working a single crochet into the ring to begin. So I'm doing that just like I did before, making my single crochet, and I'm going to put my stitch marker right in the top of that stitch. There we go. Then I am going to work 5 half double crochets in the ring, so a little bit smaller than the snout, but basically the same start, just fewer stitches. So again, I'm switching to half double crochet, and I want to make sure that I go into the circle and catch that tail for every stitch. However, using fewer stitches here won't give us a flat circle. It will help it create a cone to start making that sort of ear shape, if you will. So we've got quite a few fewer stitches to make here. Let's see how we've got. We've got our single crochet, and then 1, 2, 3, 4 half double crochets made. So I'll go ahead and make one more. But before I do that, I think I'm going to go ahead and tighten up that center circle a little bit. There we go. Get my last stitch in there. For a total of 6 stitches here in round 1. We can tighten up that circle as tight as it wants to go without breaking. Don't pull it too tight. There we go, and that's what it should look like at the end of round 1. For round 2, we're going to bring in the black color, so make sure you have that yarn ready as you begin. We're going to start with a half double crochet in the first stitch. So after I make this stitch, or at whatever point you need to, we can pull that stitch marker out. But then, of course, we want to make sure to put it right in the top of that new stitch we just made, right there. There we go. Then we are going to work 2 half double crochets in the next stitch. So I'm going to make sure we're going on to that next stitch there. Sometimes with this fuzzy yarn, if I'm having trouble seeing my stitches, I will use my fingers to sort of feel for that next opening. So I'm going to pause right here. I haven't finished that second stitch. I'm going to take a moment to pop my ear right side out. A lot of times when I crochet tightly in the round like this, it wants to create a bowl shape. I don't know if that happens for you as well, but if it does, of course, we just push it to right side out. There we go. All right, so now let's review our instructions. We're changing right now from gray to black. So we're changing to the black. We want to finish the last gray stitch with black yarn. So that's what we'll do now. So we'll find that end. I like to leave a good 6 inches or so. This is a more bulky yarn, so whenever I have a bigger yarn, I like to leave a little bit longer end. I'll just drape that right over my hook and pull through to finish that second half double crochet with our black color B in this pattern. So now I am going to work a half double crochet in the next stitch. So let me get my yarn sort of sorted out here. And I'm not going to worry, it's one stitch, so I'm not really going to worry about working over the gray color, but I certainly could if I really wanted to. There it is. Like so. Now, we only have in this round the one color in black, so we need to look at our instructions again. When we change from black to gray, we're going to finish the black stitch with our black yarn, like so, and then drop the black yarn and yarn over with the gray for the next stitch. Like I say, this isn't the typical way we change colors, but it actually creates a really nice effect for our ear. So, going back to our instructions, now that we're back to color A, we're going to work 2 half double crochets in the next stitch. Now, I am not going to work over the black. I don't want to carry it all the way around my ear and create extra bulk and have it peeking through my stitches. So instead, since we just have a very narrow section of it, I'm just going to let it hang out here until I'm ready to come back around to it on the next round. So let's go ahead and work 1, 2 half double crochets in that stitch. And then we go back to our instructions. We half double crochet in the next stitch and work 2 half double crochets in the last stitch. And the nice thing about that stitch marker is it shows us right when we've gotten to that last stitch, because it'll be the stitch right before the stitch marker. There we go. So now you should have a total of 9 stitches in this round. We've got a couple of ends in there, and at any point, whenever you're comfortable with it, you can go ahead and take a moment to weave in those ends, both the gray one and the black one right here. Just make sure, of course, that you don't do it to your working yarns. And then we're ready for round 3. So now we're ready for round 3 of our ear. We're going to start by working a half double crochet in the first 2 stitches. So once again, we want to make sure to move that stitch marker up as soon as we've got our new first stitch made. There we go. Like so. Oop. Try and get through both of those top loops. You don't have to, but personally, I just always like to. There we go. All right. Now we need a half double crochet in the second stitch, like so, and then 2 half double crochets in the next stitch. After that, though, we will be switching back to color B or black. Of course, you can make your raccoon whatever colors you like. So that means before I finish that second stitch there, I'm going to find the working end of my black yarn here. I've kind of got my ends tucked in there a little bit. Make sure you've got the end attached to the skein. and yarn over and pull through to finish that gray stitch with the black yarn. Now, again, I didn't work over this. I'm just going to gently pull it back here. I don't want to pull so tight that it causes our ear to buckle, but just, you can kind of feel it's there, it's solid, it's not going anywhere. If it worries you, you can always crochet over that bit of black. I know it's really hard to see here, but you can always crochet over that in the next couple of stitches if you prefer. Personally, I haven't found it to be an issue. So now that we've got our black color on our hook, color B, we're going to half double crochet in the next 2 stitches. So we go right in the next stitch, and then in the stitch after that. Now we are going to be switching back to color A after that, but remember, we finish our black stitches with the black, then we drop it and yarn over with the gray. And again, if you want to work over the gray, you can, or you can just gently pull it right across. All those crisscrosses of yarn will be on the inside of the ear, so nobody will ever see them. After we've got that gray yarn back on our hook, then we are going to, let me check my instructions here and see right where we are. We work 2 half double crochets in the next stitch, so right here. 1 and 2. Then half double crochet in the next 2 stitches. 1 and 2. There we go. And then finally, we wrap it up with 2 half double crochets in the very last stitch. And that should give us a total of 12 stitches on this round. Now, I need to pull up a little bit more yarn here so I can get that very last stitch made. As you are making your ears, you may find, as I do, that the yarns tend to become a little bit twisted. So at the end of every round or so, I like to just take a moment to untwist my yarns before I begin the next round. So you can see we are now getting a pretty good ear shape, and it's time to begin round 4. We're going to start with a half double crochet in the first 3 stitches. So we go right into that marked stitch, of course, for our first one. And we always want to put that stitch marker right back in there. With the ear, it's maybe not as hard to tell when you come all the way around, but when you're working those flat circles or the big body pieces, it gets really difficult if you don't have a stitch marker in there. So there's 1. We need a half double crochet in the second stitch, a half double crochet in the third stitch, and then 2 half double crochets in the next stitch. 1 and 2. But of course, we're going to switch. You can kind of tell now by looking at our ear. We're going to drop that before I finish our stitch and pull through with our black yarn. Again, just gently pull it through. You don't want it to be tight in the back, but you don't want it to be loose. You can just kind of play with that until it sits there really nicely. And again, you can crochet over that in the next couple of stitches if you'd prefer. You can also work over the gray if you'd like at this point to start bringing that over to where we need it here on the other side. So now that we've got, again, the black yarn is on our hook, we are going to half double crochet in the next 3 stitches. So we go right in the next one, and I'm going to go ahead and grab the gray here just to help bring it over a little bit. So there's 1. In both of those loops. Just take your time with it. Especially when we're working with black yarn, sometimes you have to just kind of feel for it more than anything. Having bright light and a white background can be very helpful. So now we're ready for our third stitch here. And of course, again, because it's the black yarn, I'm going to go ahead and finish it, then drop it and pick up the gray to yarn over for our next stitch. So going back to our instructions here, we're going to work 2 half double crochets in the next stitch. So there's 1. Oh, well, they're almost 1. There we go. There's 1 and 2. And then we are going to half double crochet in the next 3 stitches. Pulling up a little bit more yarn here from my ball. There we go. 1, 2, and 3. If your yarn starts to kind of come up on you there, take a moment and just push it out of the way. And then we want to finish up with 2 half double crochets in the very last stitch. There we go. So there we are at the end of round 4, and we've got a really good raccoon ear going on right here. And now we're all set up for round 5. So now for round 5, we're going to begin with a half double crochet in the first 4 stitches. You might be noticing a little bit of a pattern here. This gives us this really great shape for our ear. So we've got, there's our first one, and then 2, 3, 4. Now we're ready for our increase. We need 2 half double crochets in the next stitch, but we can see we're going to be switching to black here on the last one. So we drop the gray and pull up the black yarn. And again, just gently pull it across that space, like so. That's about the tension level I like to have on that. If you can kind of see, it's tight, but it's not taut. You know, it's right there. Then we are going to half double crochet in the next 4 stitches. And you don't have to catch, you know, the yarns that you're carrying across in every stitch, but I like to tack them down in a couple. So maybe on this third one, I'll go ahead and grab that gray yarn and put it in that stitch so that it's brought over a little bit closer. There we are. There's our 4th stitch. Again, when I'm switching from black to gray, I'm going to finish my stitch with black, then drop it and pick up the gray to yarn over. Then I'll need 2 half double crochets in this stitch, 1 and 2, then half double crochet in the next 4 stitches, 1, get my yarn straightened out here, I need to do some of that untwisting at the end of this row. So there's 2, 3, 4, and then finish it up with 2 half double crochets in that very last stitch, 1 and 2. So now at the end of round 5, you should have a total of 18 stitches, and your ear should look like this. And now we're ready for round 6, where we're going to half double crochet in the first 5 stitches. Some of you may have guessed. We go ahead and put that first one in there, put our stitch marker right in the top. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Then we need our 2 half double crochets in the next stitch. And again, we know we're going to switch on the second one. So there's 1 and 2. You can drop that yarn color. At this point, we're pulling it the farthest we're going to pull it. This is the last round where we're going to be using this color. So go ahead and just gently pull that across as best you can. I like to I call it giving it a little zhuzh. I go back and forth like this a little bit. And that seems to help it settle down and give it the right degree of tension there. You can see how that looks. So then we are going to half double crochet in the next 5 stitches. So there's 1, 2. Straighten out your yarns as necessary. I've got a few more twists in mine at this point. 3, 4. Oh, and I forgot to grab my gray, so I'll go ahead and make sure to do that here on this one. Just lay that gently across. And then, of course, I'm going to finish that stitch with our black, let it fall, and yarn over with our gray to finish this round. So we need 2 half double crochets in the next stitch, 1 and 2. Half double crochet in the next 5 stitches. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. I'm going to need to pull up a little bit more yarn here. When you're working with super bulky yarns, you really do, of course, run through it relatively quickly. So let me pull up just a couple feet here so we can finish up this round. So we need 2 half double crochets in that very last stitch, like so. Now at this point, we can go ahead and break the black color. We don't need any more of that. I still want to leave a little bit of a tail here so I can sew it in on the inside of the ear really well. But now we're ready to finish it up with round 7, which is really not even a full round. Again, it's just sort of tapering down, just like we do on the body and the snout and so many of the other pieces that are worked in a spiral. So we start with a single crochet in the first stitch. And at this point, you could use your stitch marker back in there if you want to. We don't need it anymore, but if you'd like to keep track, some people like to. Then we slip stitch in the next stitch right down here. And then we're going to do the same thing we did for the snout. We want to break our yarn, but we want to leave a long tail so that we can sew our ear onto the body without having to cut an additional bit of yarn. So I'm going to get the black yarn untangled from the gray. There we are. And then I'm going to basically do the same thing that I did with the snout. I'm going to, as best I can, because it's kind of an odd shape here, we're going to go around it 2.5 or 3 times or so before we cut the yarn. This way I know I will have plenty to sew it on with. Oh, there we are. I had some fuzzies caught in those scissors. So if I get it straightened out here, there we go, I can finish this off the same way. I'm going to just pull up on that loop like so. And then I can put that aside, grab my yarn needle. Always a couple of little fuzzies when you're working with Bernat blanket. Not too bad. But when you cut chenille, you're always going to have, that little bit that cuts off. There we go. So now we can take that end and do the same thing. We just go right under the next stitch and pull that through. Try not to catch any of our ends. There we go. And then right back into the stitch we came out of, right in the center there. That gives us a really nice finished looking edge. And now we're all set up to sew it right onto our fox. I do recommend that you take a moment and sew in those ends on the inside. You don't have to cut them off. You can just, weave them in a little bit so they stay put. And we don't need to stuff our ears. When we go to sew them on, what I like to do is just hold them flat like this and kind of give them a little curve and then sew them on right to the body. You can see it stands up really nice and beautifully and has a great stiffness all on its own. Now we're ready to begin the tail, which we're going to be using the black and the gray. This time we're going to start with the black. Now I want to show you on the finished squish, here is that tail. And as you can see, I worked from this end up and I worked in a spiral. This does cause a little bit of a color jog in the tail, which I just put at the bottom of the tail when I sewed it on. If this bothers you, you can, of course, work the entire tail in joined rounds instead. You would simply join at the end of each round and chain one before beginning the next. Let's go ahead and make it though as written. I'm going to start with our black color or color C. And I'm going to start, as I have started most of these pieces here, by making a magic circle. Twice over my finger like so. I'll get my chain one and we start with a single crochet right into that ring. There we are. And again, I want to make sure to pull up my stitch marker and put that right in that first stitch. There we go. Then, just like the ear, we're going to continue with 5 half double crochets in the ring for a total of 6 stitches. From here, we're going to be making some simple increases to increase the diameter of our tail. So for round 2, we work 2 half double crochets in each stitch around. We'll have a total of 12 stitches. As always, when you make the first stitch of each round, I highly recommend that you move a stitch marker right into that first stitch. Working in black yarn certainly won't make it easier to find your individual stitches. So I'll see you when we're ready for round 3. So as you can see, our tail is starting to sort of create that cone shape. Again, when I was crocheting, it really wanted to go this way, so I just pop it this way. So now it's right side out. And again, whenever you'd like, you can go ahead and weave in that very first end. For round 3 that we're ready for now, we've got a pretty simple repeat. We half double crochet in the next stitch, which in our case here is the first stitch. So we want to put our stitch marker right in there, like so. And then 2 half double crochets in the next stitch. So there's 1 and 2. And that is our repeat all the way around for this round. We want to work 1 in the next, then 2 in the stitch after that. And that will give us a total of 18 stitches at the end of round 3. So for round 4, we're still using just the black yarn. We're going to work 2 half double crochets in the next stitch. Again, this is beginning our repeat. When it's the very first one, we need to move up that stitch marker. There we go. Oop. Sometimes got to get a little bit bigger stitch markers for this yarn. There we go. So again, we're on round 4. So we have 2 half double crochets in that first stitch, and then half double crochet in the next 2 stitches. And that will be our repeat for this round. So let's do that again. 2 half double crochets in the next stitch, 1 and 2. And then a half double crochet in each of the next 2 stitches. So at the end of round 4, you'll have a total of 24 stitches. So as you can see, our cone is really growing and we've got a great tip of our tail made. We've got one more round here before we switch to our gray color. So for round 5, we're going to work our repeat as follows. Half double crochet in the next stitch. We'll move our stitch marker right on up. There we go. Then 2 half double crochets in the next stitch. So that's 1 and 2. and then a half double crochet in each of the next 2 stitches. 1 and 2. So let's do that repeat one more time together, because this one does have our increase right in the middle of the stitches, helps avoid creating corners to our circle here and keeps it nice and smooth. So that's why that's like that. So let's do our repeat again from the beginning. We half double crochet in the next stitch, work 2 half double crochets in the stitch after that, and then half double crochet in the next 2 stitches. So continue that repeat all the way around, and you should have a total of 30 stitches at the end of round 5. So here I've got round 5, but you can see I haven't quite finished my very last stitch, because for round 6 we're going to switch over to our gray color, or color A. So rather than finishing my color with the black yarn here, I'm going to go ahead and finish it with the gray. For the tail, we go back to our typical, our most usual style of color changes. Now, from here, as I crochet the rest of the tail, I can carry the unused color along the inside. If you'd prefer to break it, you absolutely can, but I prefer to carry it along and have less ends to weave in. So for rounds 6, 7, and 8, we're simply going to crochet evenly, meaning we're going to half double crochet in every stitch around. So let's take a quick look at our finished tail, because there's quite a few rounds here that we're just going to work even, half double crocheting in each stitch around. So you can see here is the tip of our tail, and here are those rounds 6, 7, and 8. And because we're working in a spiral, they end up splitting a little bit like this. We continue to work even, switching back to the cray for rounds 9, 10, and 11. When we get to round 12 right here, which would be the beginning of our second gray stripe, we're going to start introducing a little bit of decreases to bring us down so we've got a nice finish to attach to the body. So I'm going to go ahead and jump to round 12 now. Now, obviously here on our demo piece, I'm not at round 12, but we're going to go ahead and work it together anyway. We're going to start by working a half double crochet in the next 13 stitches. So that means we're starting right in that first marked stitch. So we're going to mark that one again. There we go. So that's 1. And then we need 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Need a little bit more yarn here. 10, 11, 12, and 13. There we go. So that should get us just about halfway around our tail. Then we're going to half double crochet 2 together. Now, there's a standard way to half double crochet. There's some fudging it ways to half double crochet. And I recommend you do what you think looks best. Everybody's hand and tension, the way they hold their yarn, the way they pull back on it or don't pull back, are going to affect how this stitch looks. And this stitch is particularly funky like this because of all the yarn overs. So again, you can do it however you like. I'm going to show you the way I like to do it when I make these squishes. I'm going to start by yarning over and going into the next stitch as usual. Then I'll go right into the next stitch and pull up a loop from there without yarning over first. This reduces one of the loops that shows up in the stitch and makes it look a little bit more like a standard single crochet. You can see right there, it doesn't stick out quite as much as if we'd had yet another yarn over in there. Again, you can do it however you prefer. After we've got that one on there, then we simply half double crochet in the next 13 stitches and then do another decrease just like we just did in the last 2 stitches. So here's round 12, which I just made. We half double crocheted in 13 stitches and then did a half double crochet 2 together. Repeated from the asterisk means we did that again. From there, we've basically done all these stitches. We just need to follow along with the written instructions, which again are free on wooglyblog.com. For round 13, we just work in each stitch around. For round 14, we work our half double crochets in 6 stitches, then that decrease, half double crochet in 12, then decrease, and half double crochet in the last 6. Then we half double crochet evenly around again. We're going to have a couple of color changes, but it's really all just the same stitches I've been demonstrating, and you can follow right along with the instructions. For round 16, we half double crochet in the first 8, then decrease, half double crochet in the next 11, decrease, and half double crochet in the last 3. Again, we're moving those decreases around kind of like we did with our increases to make sure we maintain a really nice round shape. Half double crochet in each stitch around, and then we're finally done with our color C, which would be our black color, and we're going to finish it all up in color A. Again, just a bunch of decreases to bring it down to size so that we can attach it to our body. Before we get to the very end, we want to stop and weave in those first ends, if we haven't already, and make sure to lightly stuff the tail with fiber fill before we finish it up with a round of single crochet 2 together. And then we've got those last couple stitches that finish up our spiral like we've been doing on our other pieces. So again, you know how to make this. I've shown you the stitches. Just follow along with the written instructions, and you can count out exactly where to put those decreases. And of course, I've got stitch counts at the end of each round as well. Next up is the raccoon mask, for which we'll need both our black and our white yarns, but for the majority of it, we'll just be working with the black yarn. So I'm going to set that one aside. Now, for once, we're not going to start with a magic circle. This piece actually begins with a chain of 13. So I put my slip knot on my hook, and we'll go ahead and chain 13. We are going to work back into each of these chains, so make sure you pull up a little bit on that hook and give yourself enough room to get back in there. So it is hard to see once you've made your chain here all in black. Again, having some bright light and a white background does help, at least in person. I also like to just use my fingertips and feel for the stitches that I want to work into. I know I prefer to work into the back hump, and I want to skip the stitch closest to the hook and come down to the next one so I can sort of feel that loop right there. So we want to put a half double crochet in that chain and each remaining chain on across. Since we skipped the chain closest to our hook, that means we should have a total of 12 half double crochets here at the end of this first row of our raccoon mask. So here I've finished row 1, and I have a total of 12 half double crochets. Right now we're working in rows. We are going to switch to rounds, but for now we're going to chain 1 and simply half double crochet in each stitch across. Okay, so now we're ready for round 3. That's right, we're switching from rows to rounds. So we're going to start, as usual though, by turning our work. I like to chain 1 and then do my turn, however you like to do it. And then we're going to half double crochet in each stitch across. So for right now, it's going to feel just like what we've been doing. But because we're going to be working it around, I want you to go ahead and grab a stitch marker and pop it right in the top of the first stitch of this row, if you haven't already been using them. Stitch markers can always be handy, whether you're working in rows or rounds, to help you know where to begin and end your rows, and to mark out, of course, any special stitches. So since I'm switching over to rounds, I want to make sure to put one right in the top of that first stitch. So I'm just going to half double crochet my way across this row and see you at the end. So right now, officially, I've just made 3 rows, but this third one is a round. So what we're going to do is, rather than turning our work over as we normally would working in rows, we're going to turn it this way. And now this is the row I'm making. So we've got 2 rows below it, one here and one here. And I want to work 2 half double crochets in the end of each of these rows. Again, I know this is hard to see, and if it's hard for you to see, it'll be even harder for others to see. So just use your fingers and feel. Find a couple loops at the end of that row. Don't overthink it, and find a space you can get your hook in there, and we'll put 2 half double crochets right in that same space. Then, again, use your fingers. Feel, come down. We can tell there's our slip knot right there. So here's the end of that row. And we're just going to kind of use our fingers and our hook to guide us and find a spot where we can get in on the end of that row. I always like to sort of get 2 loops on top of my hook. If I'm not finding them there, I'll stop and re-enter from a different spot. There we go. That looks good. And I'll go ahead and put my 2 half double crochets in the same spot here right at the end of that row. Now, going back to our instructions, we're going to half double crochet in the bottom of each stitch there at the bottom of row 1. So right across our foundation chain. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to let that end here fall to the back out of the way, but I can use that to guide me. I can feel there's that slip knot. That means the bottom of that first stitch is right there. And and I want to put a half double crochet in just one in each of these stitches. And again, I can use my fingers to help guide me right across the row. So since we started with 12 stitches here, we should have 12 stitches right across the bottom. And I'll see you when we get to the end of this section. So I've worked a half double crochet in the bottom of each of those stitches in row 1, which brings us back here to the other end. You can see we've got our stitch marker waiting for us here on this round we've begun. And now we need to look a little closely because this is the beginning of this round right here. This is the end of this round right here. Here are the 2 rows in between. And again, we want to put 2 half double crochets in the end of each of these rows. So we can just kind of look at it and visually see. There's one row here is the row we're on. We want to come right about here. So again, we can use our fingers or use our hook and just kind of find a spot where we can pick up a couple of stitches and stick our 2 half double crochets right there. There we go. Then same thing. We come to the next row. We know this is the row we're on. We don't want to go all the way over here. We want to be right about here somewhere. So we can make sure we've got our yarn over on there and just get our hook right in wherever it would like to go. So there's 1 and 2. Now, this raccoon mask isn't a spiral, obviously, so we're doing this one a little differently. After we've got that second half double crochet in there, we can join right to the top of that first stitch of the round with a slip stitch. Now, before I finish that, actually, because this isn't a spiral, but it is a round, I also want to put a stitch marker, in that last half double crochet of the round. So now I'll be able to tell where each round begins and ends, and I won't get mixed up thinking the slip stitch is a stitch itself. So now I can slip stitch to that first stitch of the round, and this is what it should look like at the end of round 3. So now we're ready for round 4. Round 4 is the last round of our mask before we add our little white eyebrows. And for this round, you're going to want to have some more stitch markers handy. So to begin round 4, we start with a chain of 1, and then we're going to half double crochet in the first 2 stitches. So that go right into that first marked stitch there. Of course, I had to move the stitch marker out of the way, and I'm going to move that one up to our new first stitch. There we go. Oop, get that back in there. Then I half double crochet in the next stitch after that. And then we single crochet in the next 2 stitches. 1, 2, and then we're going to loosely slip stitch in the next 4 stitches. And what do I mean by that? Loosely slip stitching is a great way to get a really nice even slip stitch. It also allows you to stitch back into that slip stitch without really having to struggle with your hook. So what we do for that is I'm going to go ahead and go right into that next stitch as usual and pull up my loop. But before I pull that loop right into the loop before it, I'm going to take a moment to go ahead and pull it up and make sure those 2 loops are nice and even. Then I will pull this loop through the first loop, but after I finish that, I'm going to go ahead and pull up, and I'm not going to pull back on my working yarn. I want to make sure not to tighten that back up. So then I'm going to do that in the next 3. So there's my second slip stitch, third slip stitch. You can see I just pull it right through, not tightening it up at all. Fourth slip stitch, like so. And then we go back to 2 single crochets. 1, 2. Then we half double crochet in, let me check my instructions here, the next 2 stitches. 1 and 2. See my yarn's rolling up here to join us. I need to pull up a little bit more length here to work with. There we go. And then if we go back to our instructions, we have 3 double crochets in the next stitch. So there's 1 and 2 and 3, and those all go in the same stitch. That helps bring us around that corner there nicely. Then we double crochet in the next stitch. And now, if you look at the instructions, you'll see it says PM in stitch just made. That is place marker. So we put a stitch marker right in that stitch we just made. Then we double crochet in the next stitch and work 3 double crochets in the stitch after that. Get that tail out of the way. There we go. 1 and 2 and 3. All right. And once we've got that made, then we half double crochet in the next 2 stitches. Find our way across here. So there's 1 and 2. And then we are going to single crochet in the next 2 stitches. Should sound familiar. 1 and 2. And then I just want to make sure I'm on the right spot here in my instructions. Yep, we loosely slip stitch in the next 4 stitches. Same thing. I want to take the time to pull that loop up before we pull it through. Up and then through. Up and then through. We need 1 more. Up and then through. Not pulling back on that yarn at all. We single crochet in the next 2 stitches. 1, 2, and now we place a stitch marker in the stitch we just made, which is that single crochet we just made, and half double crochet in the next 2 stitches. 1 and 2. There we go. I always like to take just a moment and straighten it out and pull up my new bit of yardage here to make this last bit of our mask. So with those 2 half double crochets made, we work 3 double crochets in the next stitch. So there's 1, 2, and 3. Double crochet in each of the next 2 stitches. 1 and 2. Let's see, a little bit more yarn here to finish up. We finish up the whole round with 3 double crochets in the very last stitch. And we can double check that we're in the right spot because we've got that last stitch marked. You can see with the slip stitch, that could be really confusing to the eye otherwise. Another reason I love using these stitch markers. So we know we're in exactly the right spot when we get to the end of the round. So there's 1 and 2 and our 3rd stitch. And I'm not going to worry about breaking this stitch at all. And in fact, I'm going to go ahead and soon take this one out as well. But these 2, those ones we placed while we were working the round, we're going to use those to help us place our eyebrows. So we need to stop right here. It is time to break our yarn and seamless join. But once again, we want to make sure that we leave enough length here on our tail that we can sew our mask to our finished raccoon body. So I'm going to do the same thing I did before and just take my yarn and go right around the piece that I want to sew on about 2.5 to 3 times. 3 times, like I say, is probably excessive, but I prefer to have a little extra yarn and have a little bit of extra waste rather than have to cut a whole new piece to finish sewing it on with. So once we've got that length cut for ourselves, we can go ahead and just pull up again on that loop, just like we did before until we get that end all the way through. There we go. I'm going to go ahead and move these stitch markers out of the way so they don't try and get tangled into what we're doing. And we can put that end right on our yarn needle, just as we've been doing. I like to sort of fold over the end sometimes. It makes it a little bit easier, I think, to get it on the needle. There we go. And now we are going to go ahead and finish up. So we're not going to be crocheting back into this stitch at all, so we can just go right into that first stitch. We don't need to worry about stitch count or anything like that, so make it easy. Go right in that first stitch, pull it through, and then go right back into the stitch you came from. There we are. Takes a minute because we've got a long tail for sewing, but there we go. Now you can see we've got a really nice edge there. I can go ahead and get this stitch marker out of the way. We don't want that one anymore. I don't want to cut my yarn or weave it in too much. You can weave it in a little bit, but leave it attached for sewing later. If you'd like to, you can go ahead and weave in that first end to make it sure it's nice and secure. But now we're all set up to add our eyebrows. So now you want to lay out your mask like this. Make sure right side is forward where we finished it up. And you've got that first stitch marker out here to the side and the second stitch marker up top. We're going to use these to help us know where to join for each of those eyebrows. So now we're going to bring in our white yarn, or again, whatever color you want to use for your eyebrows. If you're going with something fun like neon, you can certainly do that. And we're going to be working in the back loop only throughout. Now, again, unfortunately, we've got black yarn here, so let me pull up a different piece that makes it a little bit easier to see. Here you can see a simple granny square, but it's in a nice light bright yarn. And you can see when we're looking at any stitch, as you know, a crochet stitch has two loops on the top, sort of make nested V's. And as we look at them, there's a loop that's closest to us, and there's a loop that's furthest away. The loop closest to us is the front loop, and the one furthest away is the back loop. To work under the back loop only, we put our hook right between those loops and still work away from us. We don't come like this towards us. This hook, of course, is too big for this square, but we want to go just under that back loop to make our stitches. And those are the loops we want to work into when we are making our eyebrows. Now, again, if you're having trouble finding the back loops, again, on this super fuzzy yarn, it probably doesn't matter as much, but I think it adds a nice touch. So what I want to do is join to this first marked stitch, the one that's on the side, with a slip stitch. We're going to be working back loop only slip stitches for these eyebrows. So I kind of kept my thumb right there, as you can see, so I wouldn't lose my place. And then I just make a real quick little slip stitch, and I like to tighten that one up just a little bit there right on that first stitch. So now we are going to, I join to the first one, and then I'm going to slip stitch in the next 8 stitches. So I'm going to find that next one, and again, I want to try and find just that back loop only as much as possible. And just do a loose slip stitch. Now we're not going to work back into these, so you don't have to worry about that, but we also don't want them to tighten up and cause our mask to have any sort of folds or tightness or tension to it. And we are going around a curve, so we want to make sure to give it the length it needs. The nice thing is at this point we're working in the white yarn, so it makes it a little bit easier to count our stitches. So let's see how far we've come. We've got the one we joined with, and then we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We need 2 more. 7 and 8. Now, these eyebrows give our little guy a lot of personality. So if you'd like to change his look a little bit, think about where you can put those eyebrows. Maybe start them further down, move them further up, make them smaller. You can really create a lot of expressions with this. Once you've got those 8 slip stitches done, then we're going to go ahead and break our yarn. And we're not going to use this yarn to do any sewing, so we can cut a regular length for this. After that, I just pull up on that end, and then I will take my yarn needle once again. And I'm not going to seamless join this time. I'm just going to pull this kind of here to the back, maybe go back down into that same stitch to tack it down, like so. And then I would get all these little fuzzies off there and just weave this in on the back of the mask. It doesn't have to be too pretty as long as you can't see it from the front. Then I would do the exact same thing, join to the next stitch marker, and then back loop only slip stitch in the next 8 stitches, just like we did for the first one, starting at the next stitch marker. So now it's time to talk about assembly. And I like to go through the steps in this order. You can mix it up a little bit, but you want to make sure to have all your little pieces ready to be sewn on before you sew them on, and that you have all the sewn on little bits before you add the belly to the body, which is our final seam all the way around. So here we have that snout, that first piece we actually made together, and you can see I've got my tail end here ready to weave in later. So now it is time to add our nose, and if you'd like, your smile. So the way I do that is I find a safety nose. This one happens to be a 19mm one, and I've linked the ones that I like to use in the pattern. So you can kind of play with this and create your own look. If you're not going to do a face, you can kind of move it around, or a mouth rather, I should say. I like to kind of put it right here. As you can see, it's right between rounds 1 and 2, and I just go opposite the tail to help me sort of get that centered. And I just pick a stitch and stick it right through. You can see like that. There is a shank to a safety eye or nose. You just push right through the fabric like so, and then you put on the back. When you put on the back, you want to make sure to push really hard so that it snaps all the way down. That's what holds your safety eye on. Now, as you can see, this is a nice big back and it should hold securely. However, if you are making this squish for a child under the age of 3, it is recommended, especially if there's any chance they could use it unattended, that you actually embroider on these details rather than using safety eyes. Safety eyes, as you can see right here, are not suitable for children under 3 years due to small parts, and we certainly wouldn't want anybody to get hurt. After you've added your nose, you can take a little bit of black yarn and simply sew on that smile however you'd like. I recommend you play with it quite a bit. I always end up making several of them before I'm pleased with them, but if we take another look at our finished squish right here, You can see this is the one that I was pleased with. I just took a little bit of yarn, went straight down from the nose, and sewed out really gently a little bit. It took a few tries, and I even got a little fuzzy on it. There we go. Took a few tries, but I really was pleased with this one in the end. And of course, you can make just a single line, not add a smile, add a bigger smile. Give your raccoon the expression you're looking for. Our next step is to add the eyes to the mask, which again, we want to do before we sew it onto the body, because otherwise we don't have access to the back of that fabric to add our safety eyes. And we can take our mask like so and just go ahead and push those safety eyes right through. And again, play with the placement. I've written out at the end of near the end of round 2 or row 2, that's where I placed mine, but you can place them in different locations to really change the look of your raccoon. Go ahead and play with them before you put those backs on. Once you've got the mask and the snout all set up with their safety eyes or their embroidery, again, just like the safety nose, safety eyes are not recommended for children under 3, then you can go ahead and sew them onto the body. And again, you'll do that before your stuffing when it's still its own individual part. You can look at the pattern in my past squishes if you'd like to see more about that. But we're just going to take those long tails that we left on those pieces to use them to sew them on the larger piece on the body itself. Now, I recommend that you take your stitch markers and pin out where you want it to be before you start sewing and check it frequently as you go. You'll want to make sure to sew the mask first and then the snout. As you can see, the snout overlaps the mask. So play with those placements a little bit too before you sew anything down. You'll want to put both of those opposite the tail end of the body, which would have been right back here. That's where we finish off, and that's actually what we want to use to line up the tail itself when it's time to sew on the tail. So again, just make sure to go roughly opposite. If you're off a couple of stitches, literally nobody's going to know but you, but do your best to go sort of opposite and line up the mask and the snout. Once you've got those sewn on, you can use those to help you line up the ears, which would be the next part I'd recommend you move to. So those are going to be sewn, again, right to the top of the body before you join the body and the belly together. Make sure you have full access to the inside of this fabric while you are sewing all of these pieces on. So for the ears, we're simply going to, as I showed you before when we made them, sort of fold them in half and then again, pin them onto the body fabric before you sew them on. And it's nothing fancy. It's not a fancy particular stitch or anything like that. You simply put that yarn end on your needle and sort of just do your best to go through both pieces of fabric and sort of whip stitch them right on down. I do have whip stitch tutorials on my YouTube channel here if you'd like to take a closer look at those. But you can see, I, of course, want to make sure the black portion of our ear is on the same side or facing our face, if you will. And the placement of the ears, again, you can play with this. The placement of the ears, just like the placement of the face, really does change the expression of your raccoon. So you can have a lot of fun with that. I put mine, you can see right here, sort of the center of the body, again, is centered behind them. The face is in front. We've curved the ears slightly, and they're at about rounds 5 to 7 of the body. Again, you can place them where they look right for you. Just do your best to pin each one down, make sure they're straight before you sew them on, and check it frequently, especially before you weave in your ends. After you've got the mask, then the snout, then the ear sewn on, the last piece we actually need to sew on before we can put our belly to our body is the tail itself. And of course, for that, I just centered it right in the back as best I could. I kind of came right down between the ears. Again, I used the end of that round, you can see right there, to help guide me a little bit right there. And then I just sewed it right on, just going right through that final round as much as possible and sewed it to the body. And again, you can see I stuffed it, but I didn't overstuff it. It's not overly firm. This is how I like to do it, but you can, of course, stuff it as much or as little as you'd like. After you've got the tail sewn on, then the very last step is to put the ball or stuffing, whatever you're putting inside the body to stuff it, and then sew on that belly. Of course, the feet have been attached while you made the belly. We saw that in the fox squish. And you just whip stitch. If you look very closely, you can see the line right there where the last round of the belly, which is in gray, and the last round of the body were very simply whip stitched together all the way around. Now, when it comes time to do this, when you've put the ball inside the body and you've got the belly ready to attach, you'll want to use your stitch markers and go all the way around and match up. I like to do every 5 stitches And I'll count out 5 on each side and stitch marker them together. Count out 5 on each side and stitch marker them together all the way around. This really does so much to help you link up those stitches. As you're doing this, it may look like there's no way this ball is going to fit. I have made videos about this several times. It always looks crazy. People always say, there's no way it's going to fit. There's no way it's going to fit. I can almost guarantee it's going to fit if you're using a 10-inch ball and you use the correct hook size and the correct yarn. It will look crazy. They will look like they're far apart, but take those stitches, pull the fabric itself. That's what creates this really nice, tight fit. It'll look tight, but trust the process, stitch to stitch to stitch. There's the same number of stitches in the last round of the belly as there are in the last round of the body. Match them up 1 to 1, and it should fit just fine. And that's how to crochet your very own Raccoon Squish. Thanks so much for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe.